was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. Thus begins the story, a tale that speaks of an age suspended between promise and ruin. Across two cities, London, which was steady and watchful, and Paris, which was restless and trembling, the air carried both whispers of freedom and the rattle of chains. In palaces of gilded mirrors, nobles raised their glasses to endless indulgence, while in the shadows of broken streets, hungry eyes searched for bread. A world divided, yet bound by the same fate, waiting for the tide of revolution to sweep away all certainties. Amidst this storm of contrasts, the lives of strangers would converge: an exiled doctor, a daughter yearning for love, a suitor torn by pride, and a weary soul who would one day find his redemption in sacrifice. So, the stage was set, and history itself leaned forward, listening to it. On a cold November night in 1775, a mail coach moved slowly along a rough road leading to Dover. The wheels creaked, the horses labored, and the passengers inside sat wrapped in silence, each suspicious of the other. Those were dangerous times, highwaymen prowled the roads, and no one dared to trust a stranger too easily. Inside the coach was Mr. Jarvis Lorry, a middle-aged man with calm but serious eyes. He worked for Tellson's Bank in London. But Tellson's was not just an ordinary bank that handled money. In those days, banks often acted as family agents, managing estates, wills, guardianship, and delicate matters of trust. Mr. Lorry was one of their most reliable men, steady and trustworthy, always called upon for duties that required both discretion and heart. As the coach climbed a hill, a horseman appeared in the gloom. The guard raised his weapon, fearing a robber, but the rider was only a messenger. He brought a note for Mr. Lorry. By lantern light, Lorry read the words. They were from Tellson's Bank, which read: "Wait at Dover for Miss Lucie Manette. Together, you must travel to Paris. Her father has been found alive. The matter is recalled to life." Lorry stared at the words "recalled to life." 18 years earlier, Dr. Alexander Manette, a French doctor, had been imprisoned in the Bastille, lost to the world. His wife had died soon after, leaving their baby daughter an orphan. Tellson's Bank had arranged to bring that child, Lucie, to England, and had overseen her upbringing. Now, after all this time, the father once thought dead had been released. The bank's duty was clear: reunite father and daughter. And Lorry, who had once carried little Lucie across the sea, was chosen again. Closing his eyes, he whispered the words like a prayer, recalled to life. The next day, at an inn in Dover, Lorry waited. A young woman entered, slender and golden-haired, her face gentle and her blue eyes full of innocence. It was Lucie Manette. She had lived her life believing her father dead. Now she was about to hear the truth. Lorry spoke carefully, gently. He reminded her of the bank's care for her as a child, of how he himself had helped rescue her long ago. Then, in a low voice, he told her, "Your father, Dr. Manette, is alive." Lucie gasped, her hand flying to her lips. "Alive? After all these years?" "Yes," said Lorry softly. "Alive, though broken by long suffering. He has been found in Paris. Our task is to bring him back to life." Tears filled her eyes. She trembled with both joy and fear. "I will go to him," she whispered. "I will care for him. I will give him back his life." Laurie nodded. "With your love, he can be restored." And together, they set out for France. In the quarter of Saint-Antoine in Paris, they found Dr. Manette in a small garret above a wine shop owned by Monsieur and Madame Defarge. The wine shop was a gathering place for the poor, where whispers of revolution grew stronger each day. Madame Defarge, with cold eyes and busy hands, sat knitting at the counter, recording silently in her stitches the names of enemies marked for death. Upstairs, in the dim light, Dr. Manette sat bent over a wooden bench, making shoes. His hair was white, his face thin, his eyes hollow. For 18 years, shoemaking had been his only escape from despair. At first, he hardly noticed when Lucie entered. But when she spoke, her voice trembling, calling him "father," and when he saw her golden hair so like her mother's, something stirred within him. Slowly, he reached out and touched her hair. Golden. Like her, he whispered faintly. Lucie fell to her knees, holding him. "Please never leave me again, father," she said sobbing. And in her presence, life began to return to him. Laurie, watching silently, understood now the meaning of the words, recalled to life. After reaching England, Dr. Manette lived with Lucie in a quiet home filled with light and tenderness. At times, shadows of the Bastille returned, and he would fall into his old habit of shoemaking. But Lucie's love brought him back again. Their circle was small but warm, often joined by their faithful friend Mr. Laurie. And soon, 2 new men entered their lives. One was Charles Darnay, a young Frenchman who had left his homeland to start anew in England. Polite and thoughtful, he earned his living as a teacher of French. Yet he carried a secret. He was born into the Evermond family, nobles infamous for cruelty. He had renounced their wealth and title, unable to live on the suffering of others. The other was Sydney Carton, a brilliant but wasted lawyer. He drank heavily, lived carelessly, and called himself a jackal for doing work that made others rich while he remained in shadows. But when he met Lucie, something in him awoke. Though he knew she could never return his love, he loved her with a devotion that burned quietly but deeply. One evening, he confessed to her in private. "For you, and for those you love, I would give my life." He asked for nothing in return. He only wanted her to know that, if ever the time came, he would keep that promise. Lucie, moved by his words, pitied him with her whole heart. She could not give him love, but she gave him kindness, and that was enough to plant a seed in him that would one day bloom into sacrifice. Meanwhile, in France, things were growing darker. In the streets of Paris, hunger and anger filled the air. The poor lived in misery, their children starving, while the nobles lived in palaces and thought little of them. In the quarter of Saint-Antoine, outside the Madame Defarge's wine shop, once, a cask of red wine broke in the street, and the people rushed to scoop it up from the dirt, their faces stained red. It was a sign of what was coming. Blood would soon flow in the streets. Back in London, life seemed calmer. But trouble soon touched Charles Darnay. He was accused of being a spy for France and brought to trial in England. The case looked dangerous, for witnesses claimed to have seen him carrying secret papers. But then came a twist. Sydney Carton, with his sharp eyes, noticed that Darnay looked almost exactly like himself. This likeness confused the jury, for if 2 men could look so similar, how certain could anyone be of what they saw? Because of this, and with Mr. Laurie's help, Darnay was acquitted and set free. It was after this trial that Lucie's bond with Charles deepened. She saw his honesty, his gentleness, and his courage. He, in turn, loved her light and her compassion. Over time, their love grew, until Charles finally spoke to Dr. Manette, asking for Lucie's hand in marriage. Dr. Manette, though still haunted by his years in prison, loved his daughter more than anything. At first, he trembled to hear of marriage, for he feared losing her. But when Charles promised to cherish her and care for her always, the doctor gave his blessings. So, Lucie and Charles were married with joy and blessings around them. Time passed. Lucie and Charles had a daughter, little Lucie, whose laughter filled the house. Dr. Manette grew stronger, finding happiness in his family. Mr. Lorry continued as their faithful friend. And Sydney Carton, though still lost in his own despair, came often to visit, finding quiet comfort in Lucie's kindness. He became like an uncle to little Lucie, who warmed to him with innocent love. But far away, in France, the storm finally broke. The people rose in fury. The Bastille was stormed, prisoners freed, guards killed, and the great fortress pulled apart stone by stone. Revolution swept across the land. The nobles fled, but many were caught and killed. The guillotine rose in Paris, its blade falling day after day. Heads rolled in the squares as the crowds cheered. And Madame Defarge, with her cold eyes and her endless knitting, sat watching, recording the names of the condemned. It was in this time of terror that Charles Darnay's past came back to claim him. He received a letter from France. A servant of his family, the Evremonds, was in danger, imprisoned by the revolutionaries. Though Charles had rejected his cruel family, he felt a duty to help the servant who had been loyal to them. Against Lucie's pleas, he decided to travel to France and set things right. But as soon as he entered Paris, he was arrested. The revolutionaries saw only his family name, Evremond, and marked him as an enemy. He was thrown into prison, at the mercy of the new republic. When Lucie heard the news, her heart nearly broke. Dr. Manette, remembering his own long years in the Bastille, swore he would save his son-in-law. He believed his reputation as a victim of tyranny would give him power. With Lucie and Mr. Lorry, he hurried to Paris. At first, it seemed he might succeed. At Darnay's trial, Dr. Manette's testimony won his release. Lucie wept with joy as her husband was restored to her. But the joy did not last. Madame Defarge and her circle were not satisfied. They pushed for a second trial, bringing forward a terrible testimony, a letter written long ago by Dr. Manette himself, during his imprisonment in the Bastille. In that letter, written in despair, Dr. Manette had told the story of how two cruel Evremond brothers, who turned out to be Charles's father and uncle, had destroyed the lives of a poor peasant family. They had taken the honor of a young woman, killed her husband, and left her brother to die trying to defend her. That young woman, it turned out, had been Madame Defarge's sister. And that's why her hatred was endless. And though Charles was innocent of those crimes, he carried the Evremond name. For the revolutionaries, that was enough. The court condemned him to death by guillotine. Lucie fainted at the news, and even Dr. Manette, once strong in his resolve, was shattered. He wandered the streets, lost, unable to save his daughter's husband. Mr. Lorry did all he could, but the law of the revolution was merciless. But Sydney Carton remembered his promise. Quietly, he prepared his plan. He traveled across the channel quietly, without telling anyone his full purpose. When he arrived in Paris, he went straight to Tellson's Paris branch, where Mr. Lorry was working. There he learned the full truth. Charles had been sentenced to death, and Lucie and Dr. Manette were broken with grief. Carton walked the streets of Paris alone that night, looking at the angry crowds, the endless guillotine processions, and the ruined Bastille. It was then, wandering through that burning city, that his plan took shape. He knew at once that his life, was dead for so long, could find meaning in this one final act. He had no fear. His heart was steady, for he knew what he must do. He thought of Lucie, her golden hair, her gentle smile, the peace she gave to everyone around her. He thought of her child, little Lucie, whose small hands had once wrapped around his finger with innocent trust. He thought of Charles, lying helpless in prison, condemned for a name that was not truly his fault. And he thought of his own life in which he wasn't dear to anyone. For the first time, he felt free. His death would not be a waste. It would have meaning. He went to the prison where Charles was held. By arrangement with a loyal servant, he entered the cell. Charles was weak, despairing, yet full of dignity. When he saw Carton, he was astonished, for the two men looked almost like twins. Carton leaned close to Charles and said softly, "Lucie is safe, but you must trust me. We have no time. For her sake, and for her child's, you must do as I say." Charles tried to resist, but Carton's voice grew firmer. "Think of her. Think of little Lucie. Do not fight me." But Charles kept resisting, and Sydney with a firm determination used a drug to quiet him for a while. Carton then exchanged clothes and places. Charles was carried out, unconscious, into the care of those waiting for him. And Carton remained. Alone now, but at peace. That night, Madame Defarge prepared her final act of vengeance. She wished not only Charles, but also Lucie and her child destroyed. She wanted to erase the hated bloodline. She went to their house, expecting to find them there. But Miss Pross, Lucie's devoted English companion, barred the way. The two women struggled fiercely. Madame Defarge's hand went to her pistol. It discharged in a fight, and she fell dead. Miss Pross, shaken and half-deafened by the shot, fled to rejoin Lucie. Their path of escape was now fully clear. Meanwhile, Sydney Carton walked among the condemned. The dawn was pale when the tumbrils, the carts carrying prisoners, rolled through the streets toward the guillotine. The people shouted and cheered for blood. Yet some faces were tired, some eyes were sad. The revolution devoured endlessly, and even those who had once cried loudest for death now felt the chill of it. Sydney Carton sat among the prisoners, calm as stone. His presence was different. While others trembled or wept, he sat with a quiet strength that drew eyes to him. A young seamstress, no more than 20, looked at him with wide frightened eyes and whispered, "Are you not afraid?" He smiled gently, the first true smile of his life. "No. I am not afraid," he said gently. "Why are you here? They say, you are not the one they wanted. Are you dying for him?" She murmured. "I am here in another's place," Carton said softly. "I go because of love." Tears filled the girl's eyes. She slipped her hand into his. "Hold my hand, then. I will be braver." Carton smiled gently and gave her his hand and said softly, "Yes, my dear. Until the last. We will go together." And so they rode, through crowds that cheered for blood, through streets echoing with drums and cries, past the shadow of the Bastille now torn to ruins, toward the place of execution. When the tumbril stopped before the guillotine, the prisoners were led out one by one. The blade rose and fell, with a heavy thud that silenced even the bravest hearts. Yet Carton walked forward steadily, the seamstress still holding his hand. "Are you dying for him?" she whispered once more. "Yes, and for his wife, and for his child," Carton answered softly. "Hush now. It will be quick. Be brave." They mounted the steps together. The crowd watched, murmuring of the man's calmness, his strange peace. Some felt in their hearts that they were seeing something noble, something rare, in this wasted figure who now seemed radiant with purpose. The seamstress kissed his hand before she was laid down. "I am not afraid anymore," she said. And the blade fell. Now it was Carton's turn. He stood tall, looking out at the horizon. He saw beyond the guillotine, beyond the square, beyond the angry faces. In his mind, he saw Lucie, safe in England, her arms around her husband. He saw their child, growing in beauty and kindness, who would one day honor his name. He saw peace rising after the storm of blood, a better world born from sacrifice. And then, in his final thought, came words that seemed to lift his soul above the terror of death. "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to, than I have ever known. Finally, the blade fell, and the world turned quiet. In that last moment, the wasted life of Sydney Carton found its redemption, not in despair, but in love. It found its true meaning. He gave everything for love, and in his giving, he rose above despair. Paris roared on, the revolution raged, but in one still corner of the world, sacrifice had conquered hatred. And in the memory of Lucie and her family, Sydney Carton lived forever.